Femi, it is so unbelievable how you think your mother can deprive my mother of her happy marriage by being a co-wife, and expect me to let it slide. First, your ever-joyful wife will pay for it. Then you. And finally your children. I only need to finish you with a well-planned strategy and be more friendly. And then all my father's property in your care can become mine alone. 6 months earlier. Femi Adeyemi was the kind of man other men pointed at from across the room. His cocoa warehouses stretched across 3 local governments in Osun State. His name was in the papers. His wife, Olayinka, was radiant and sharp-tongued in the best way, the kind of woman who could host 20 guests and still find time to barb Shola's hair before bedtime. Their home was loud with laughter. It was the loudest house on the street. Then came the Tuesday that swallowed everything. Olayinka had been making tea. Suddenly, Femi was in the study when he heard the cup shatter. By the time he reached the kitchen, she was already on the floor. One hand stretched toward the counter as though she had tried to hold on. Olayinka. He dropped to his knees beside her. Olayinka. Look at me. Look at me. But she could not. She was almost lifeless. The doctors said it's cardiac arrest. Sudden. Unpredictable. Nothing anyone could have done. Femi sat in the hospital corridor and laughed at that. A short, ugly laugh. Because what else do you do when the most alive person you have ever known is described in past tense by a man in a white coat? He buried her on a Friday. By the following Monday, he was back in the warehouse. The children unraveled quietly. Shola stopped talking first. Then Ode. They sat in corners, staring at walls, blinking slowly at nothing. A pediatric psychologist from Lagos charged 40,000 naira per session and said the word trauma 14 times in 1 hour. A nanny from a premium agency lasted 9 days before she called Femi at midnight. Voice shaking. Sir, I am sorry. There is something wrong with those children. They don't cry. They don't speak. They just stare. I cannot stay in this house. The second nanny left after a week. The third did not even finish her first night. Haunted. They whispered among themselves. And the word traveled. Femi heard it at a business dinner and smiled tightly while something cracked further behind his eyes. He began keeping his glass full. He began sleeping at the office. And in the big Oshogbo mansion. His children sat in the dark, waiting for someone to notice they were still there. Precious, Femi's stepsister eventually found a housemaid, through a trader she knew from the Elisa Road market. The woman who spoke about a mute orphan girl, who walked without complaint and asked for nothing. Precious drove out herself. Which was how desperate things had become. She brought Tiwa back on a Thursday morning. The girl stepped out of the car with a small raffia bag and stood in the driveway of Femi's Oshogbo mansion, taking in the size of it without blinking. Femi came to the door and greeted her. But Tiwa only knelt briefly in response. Her eyes cast downward. Silent. His jaw tightened. Precious. He pulled his stepsister aside, voice low and sharp. This is who you brought me. Is she mute? How will she follow instructions? How will she tell me if something is wrong with the children? How will she communicate with the children? She is not deaf, Precious said, without lowering her voice. She hears everything. She simply does not talk back. Which is better than the last 3 nannies you paid a fortune to. But she looks like she has never left the village. Good. That means she has not learned to gossip either. Precious walked back toward the car. Her name is Tiwa. She is an orphan. She will not steal, she will not run, and she will not call you at midnight with nonsense stories about haunted children. Pay her something small and let her walk. Femi said nothing. He looked at Tiwa once more, at her faded blouse and worn slippers on his tiled driveway, and walked back inside. The house staff treated her like furniture from the first hour. The cook pointed at the laundry room without looking up. The gateman did not bother to learn her name. Tiwa moved through it all with the quiet steadiness of someone who had long ago made peace with being invisible. It was in the late afternoon she saw the children. Shola and Ode were tucked beneath the dining table like small animals sheltering from rain. Knees pulled to their chests. Eyes fixed on the doorway. Tiwa stood at the entrance of the dining room and saw them. She did not call out. She did not move toward them. She simply lowered herself to the floor a few feet away, crossed her legs, and reached into her bag for an orange. She peeled it slowly, methodically. And without looking at them, she placed one slice on a small tray and set it on the floor between them like an offering. A long silence followed. Then a small hand reached out and took it. By the end of our first week, Tiwa understood something the expensive psychologists had missed entirely. Shola and Ode were not haunted. They were terrified. And whatever was frightening them had not left the house. She noticed it first on a Wednesday. Femi had gone to the warehouse before sunrise and the house had settled into its hollow quiet. Tiwa was folding laundry in the corridor when she heard Precious's heels on the stairs. She turned and watched Shola go completely still. Not the stillness of a child who is thinking. The stillness of a child trying to disappear. His fingers gripped his picture book until his knuckles changed color. His eyes followed Precious across the room without moving his head. Precious walked through without a word and disappeared into the kitchen. Tiwa watched Shola slowly, carefully breathe again. She began paying a different kind of attention after that. Ade stopped eating the moment Precious entered the dining room, pushing food around his plate until she left. Neither child ever laughed in any room Precious used regularly. Nobody else noticed. The cook was too busy. Femi was too lost. Tiwa began sitting with the children in the early mornings before the house woke, bringing small things, a mango, warm water, her quiet presence, until the silence between them stopped feeling like something to be afraid of. The first time Ode laughed. A hard-boiled egg had escaped her fingers 3 times across the floor. He clapped his hand over his mouth immediately. Eyes wide, as though laughter were no longer something he was allowed. Tiwa looked at the egg, looked at him, shrugged enormously, and let it roll under the table. He laughed again. Longer this time. Shola did not laugh, but something shifted in his face, and that was enough. That night, in her small room of the kitchen corridor, Tiwa pulled a worn notebook from beneath her mattress and uncapped her pen. She had been writing since she was 9, taught by a village teacher who believed silence and emptiness were not the same thing. She wrote about the children. Then she paused and thought about the pantry smell that had troubled her since her first morning. Bitter. Chemical. The exact edge of cocoa preservative. The compound used on the farms to protect harvested pods from rot. A smell that had no business living in a kitchen. She had gone back 3 more times. It was always there. Olayinka had been making tea when she died. The doctors had said cardiac arrest was the cause of her death. Tiwa underlined the word cardiac, wrote the word pantry beside it, and pressed her final line into the page. A healthy woman dies in a kitchen that smells of farm chemicals. Someone should ask why. She closed the notebook and lay down in the dark, staring at the ceiling while she lay still. It happened on a quiet Thursday afternoon. 3 months after Tiwa's arrival. Shola came to find her. He had never done that before. It was always Tiwa who closed the distance. But he walked into the laundry room where she was working, stood in the doorway, and held out a folded piece of paper with both hands. The way a child offers something precious and breakable. Tiwa dried her hands and took it. A crayon drawing. A bedroom with a dark wooden frame she recognized immediately as Olayinka's room on the upper floor, the one Femi had not entered since the funeral. And underneath the bed, colored entirely in yellow, a snake. Long, thick, deliberate. Tiwa looked up at him. His eyes were steady. He was not frightened. He was telling her something. She touched his shoulder once and he walked away. She went upstairs that evening when the house was distracted by dinner. Olayinka's bedroom door was unlocked. Tiwa dropped to her knees beside the bed and ran her hand along the dusty floor beneath it until her fingers closed around something cold and hard. A small brown bottle. Its label was bright yellow, printed with the name of a cocoa farm preservative she had seen in her uncle's storage shed years ago. She turned it over. A third of it was already gone. Her hands began to tremble. She knew immediately that Olayinka's death was not ordinary. The symptoms were indistinguishable from cardiac failure. No country doctor would ever think to look further. Olayinka had not simply died. She had been killed. Tiwa was still processing this when she heard Femi's voice downstairs. She rose with the bottle in her hand and moved toward the staircase. Precious appeared at the top of the stairs as though she had been waiting. Her eyes dropped to the bottle and she crossed the distance in 4 steps, snatching it cleanly from Tiwa's grip. You were in the master bedroom. Her voice was quiet and steady, which was worse than any shouting. You were stealing. Tiwa shook her head, reaching forward. Precious stepped back and leaned close. If you go near that room again, I will have you beaten and thrown out before Femi finishes his dinner. And nobody will believe a word from a woman who cannot even speak. She walked away down the corridor, the bottle hidden in her dress, and did not look back. Downstairs, Femi called out for his dinner. The house moved on, the way it always did, hiding everything it knew. Tiwa could not go to Femi. That much was clear. Precious had taken the only evidence and replaced it with her own story, and Tiwa had no tongue to fight with. So she became a shadow instead. She learned Precious patterns within 2 days. The older woman woke late, moved through the house with the confidence of someone who already owned it, and received visitors through the back entrance after dark. Tiwa noted the men who came. Hard-faced men. Men who did not remove their shoes. Men who pressed folded papers into Precious's palm and waited while she counted whatever was inside. On the fourth night, Tiwa crouched behind the jasmine hedge at the edge of the garden and understood everything. Precious was not alone. A woman sat across from her on the garden bench, dressed in lac that cost more than Tiwa's entire childhood. Gold at her throat, gold at her wrist, and a smile that had never once been warm. Yemi. A socialite and well-connected beautiful lady. A childhood friend of Precious. Precious had always wanted Yemi to marry her stepbrother, but now that Olayinka has been successfully taken away, the plan is working out, Precious says. You are sure Femi will agree? Yemi said, swirling her drink slowly. Precious laughed, low and certain. He is a grieving man with 2 young children. I will manage his emotions. You simply wear the right dress. Yemi tilted her head. And my percentage of the estate? 40%. The lawyers are already in position. Tiwa's chest tightened. Yemi leaned forward then, her voice dropping. And the children? Because I did not sign up for inherited complications, Precious. A pause. Just long enough to be deliberate. The children are next, Precious said quietly. There will be no heirs to complicate anything. Yemi sat back and smiled. Tiwa pressed her fist against her mouth. Her whole body was shaking. She thought of Shola's careful drawing, his yellow crayon pressed hard into the paper. She thought of Olayinka's bottle. She thought of a scattered warm cup of tea on the day Olayinka died. She pressed her back against the hedge and breathed slowly until her hand steadied. Olayinka had died alone, with no one who understood what was happening. Her children would not. Whatever it took, whatever it cost her, Tiwa was the only wall left standing between those 2 little ones and the same bitter end their mother had met. And she had not survived everything she had survived to walk away now. Inside the house, a light went on in Shola's bedroom window. Tiwa rose from the shadows and went back in. Femi had not entered the master bedroom since the burial. That was why Precious had left it to Tiwa, with a list of instructions delivered like a warning: dust everything, touch nothing personal, report directly back. Tiwa moved through the room carefully, the way you move through a place where grief still lives in the walls. She thought of sweeping underneath the wardrobe and she began to feel something strong. She reached in without breathing. Her fingers closed around the slim rectangle, cool, smooth and unmistakably familiar. A phone. Olayinka's phone, from the look of the cracked pin case, the little gold initial pressed into the corner. Oh! Tiwa sat back on her heels and stared at it. She palmed it under her apron before she stood up. It took her 3 nights to think of what to do. She found a forgotten charging cable in the laundry room behind the iron board and plugged the phone in after midnight when the house was fully asleep, crouched on the cold tile floor with her back against the washing machine, watching the screen with a concentration that made her eyes ache. It powered on the 3rd night. Tiwa went straight to the drafts folder, because something in her chest already knew. There was one draft voice note. Unsent. Time stamped 11:47 in the evening, the night Olayinka died. She pressed play. The sound hit her like a fist. Olayinka's voice came through the small speaker, thin and frightened and fighting to stay steady. Femi, the tea Precious gave me, it tastes like the warehouse, my heart is. The recording was cut off. Tiwa pressed the phone against her chest and let the tears come silently, the way she had learned to cry. Without sound. Without a weakness. Olayinka had known. In those last terrible minutes, she had known exactly what was in her cup. She had tried to reach her husband and failed, and Precious had stood somewhere in that same house and waited for her to stop breathing. Tiwa switched off the phone and kept it in her room. She could not move yet. Precious is watching her too closely and Femi trusted the wrong people. But she had something now that no one could take and no one could deny. She had Olayinka's voice. And she would use it at exactly the right moment, when the trap had no exits left. The mansion had never been so loud with the wrong kind of joy. Precious' wish finally comes true. Her stepbrother is marrying her best friend. And now she can easily finish Femi and the children just to have the property to herself. Femi stood at the center of the sitting room in his best agbada, and Yemi hung from his arm like she had already taken ownership, her laughter louder than the music. Louder than the clink of champagne glasses. Louder than everything. The elite of Oshogbo had come in their full finery and they were celebrating, but no one in that room truly understood what Precious and Yemi were actually celebrating. Tiwa moved along the edges of the crowd. Watching. She did not see the two officers until they were already beside her. You. The taller one gripped her arm. We have a report. A gold watch was found in your room. The room began to turn toward her. Precious stood near the doorway with her arms folded. Her face perfectly arranged into the expression of a woman reluctantly vindicated. Femi looked at her confused. A nanny that steals is wild, someone murmured near the back. Tiwa tried to pull free. The officer tightened his grip. Then she saw Yemi. She was moving through the crowd toward Shola and Ode with a silver tray. Two small cups balanced on it. Her smile widened and her eyes completely empty. The children reached forward. The way children reach for anything offered with sweetness. Tiwa saw the rim of the cups. Yellow. A faint, familiar residue. The same color as the crayon drawing Shola had painted in the paper with his small hands. Because he had already understood something the adults in this house refused to see. Tiwa knew the tea is dangerous for the kids, and they must not drink it. She broke free. She freed herself from the officer's grip with a strength that surprised them both and ran across the room and brought both hands down hard across the tray. The cups flew. Tea splashed in a wide arc across the rug and where it landed it did not simply soak in. It sizzled. The children screamed. Shola and Ode stumbled backward into a guest's legs, unhurt and terrified. Yemi dropped the tray with a crash. Precious's face broke for just 1 second before it reassembled. And Femi stood frozen in the middle of his own party, staring at the rug, staring at the sizzle, staring at Tiwa held between two officers while the whole room called her mad. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Femi found his voice a moment later, but it was the wrong one. He crossed the room in 4 strides and raised his hand. You silent demon. The words tore out of him raw and shaking. You have disgraced this house in front of everyone. The room held its breath. Tiwa did not flinch. She did not step back. She stood in the grip of 2 officers in front of the entire elite of Osogbo and reached into her apron with a steady hand. She pulled out Olayinka's phone. She found the draft voice note and pressed play, then walked to the DJ's table and pressed the phone against the speaker before anyone understood what she was doing. Olayinka's voice filled the sitting room. Thin. Frightened. Fighting. Femi, the tea Precious gave me, it tastes like the warehouse, my heart is. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Tiwa had ever heard. Femi's raised hand dropped slowly to his side. His face collapsed inward, the way a structure collapses when the thing holding it up is suddenly gone. Olayinka, he whispered. Tiwa was already moving. She pulled her diary from her apron, opened it to the page she had marked, and threw it at his feet. The entry described the yellow bottle, the chemical bottle, with symptoms that matched cardiac failure so perfectly that no country doctor would ever think to look further. Femi dropped to one knee and read. Precious moved first. She turned toward the side door with the quiet speed of someone who had planned an exit. Tiwa spun and pointed. One arm extended, finger steady, aimed directly at Precious's handbag. The taller officer looked at Tiwa. Then at the bag. He crossed the room and searched it and brought out the brown bottle with the yellow label. Precious is already angry. Yemi stepped backward into a cluster of guests and tried to smile and found she had nothing left to smile with. Madam. The officer's voice was quiet and final. Both of you. Do not move. The handcuffs came out and they were taken away. Femi remained on one knee on the floor of his own party, holding his dead wife's diary, weeping in a way that had no dignity left in it and did not need any. Justice, they say when it finally comes. It will not linger. The courts moved faster than anyone expected. The chemical evidence, the voice note, the diary, and the testimonies of 3 of Precious's own creditors, men who had grown nervous and very cooperative once the police came knocking, built a case that left no room for argument. Precious received 7 years imprisonment, while Yemi received 5 years imprisonment. Precious cried and shouted how much he hated Femi, explaining how her father abandoned her mother the moment he married Femi's mother. And she had vowed to let Femi suffer his mother's deeds. But nobody cares anymore. The cocoa warehouse experienced exponential growth the moment the news about Femi's family began to spread. People patronized him far and near. Femi came to Tiwa 3 days after the arrest. He did not send for her. He came himself, to the small room at the back of the house where she slept. And he stood in the doorway the way Shola had once stood in the laundry room doorway, holding something fragile. I called you the mute maid, he said. His voice was barely there. But you were the only person in this house trying to keep my children alive, and I nearly struck you for it. Tiwa looked at him without expression. I do not know how to ask for what I am asking, he said. But I will ask. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she stepped aside and let him into the room. A year passed the way good years do. Quietly and full. When Femi couldn't resist his urge for Tiwa anymore, he finally decided to marry her. And that's his best decision he made so far after Olayinka's death. He believed he married a mother for his sons. The house learned a new sound. Laughter. On an evening in October they sat together in the garden. Shola and Ode playing in the grass nearby. Then Ode stopped and looked up at her. Mommy Tiwa. Shola turned. Mommy Tiwa. Tiwa's eyes filled. She opened her arms and both children ran into them and she held them against her chest. eyes closed. Tears moving freely down her face for the first time without shame. Without silence. Without fear. She had never needed a voice. She had only ever needed to stay. Do not despise those who are silent. They are often the only ones paying enough attention to save your life. Thank you for following Tiwa's journey from beginning to end. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe so you never miss another tale. Drop a comment telling us what you think Femi's biggest mistake was. We read every single one. And do not forget to tell us where you are watching from.